All right, if you look up on the screen here, the game plan for today is when we finish the chapter 4, shape up, this is what your page should look like. All right? And you know that when you put your mouse over the maroon links, they turn steel blue. When you put your mouse over the steel blue links, they turn maroon. Okay? Other than that, it's not a whole heck of a lot we've done so far. All right? So we're going to change that. In chapter 5, we're going to do this. Now, it's pretty obvious, hopefully, when you take a look at it, most of the stuff has changed. First of all, for lack of better words, we put the page into a container. All right? You can call it a div, you can call it whatever you want. But there's some rhyme and reason to it. You can see we've got a black shadow that goes along the left, along the bottom, along the right, and I'm not even sure if it's at the top or not. I don't care right now. All right? You can see we've got our header and footer areas. The header area has a gradient in it. You can hopefully see that. The footer area has just got a color in it. We've got white for the color of our footer. Our header area, other than that, hasn't changed real much. So that's what we want. Then once we get done with that, in chapter 6, you are to do two things. You are to first go in and create a 2-column layout. So basically what we've done here is, from the previous one, we have taken the additional resources that previously was at the bottom of the page, and we've added it as an aside and put it on the left-hand side of the page. That's a 2-column format. I know someone had asked, the other day, they had said, well, you know, couldn't you just as well even have put a menu or something up? Sure, of course you can. That can be anything you want. It can be as long as you want it to be. And it can be any color, etc. All right? Then when we get done with that one, the idea will be, we'll go to a 3-column layout. So you've got a left aside, you've got a main content area, and you've got a right aside. There really isn't any limit. I mean, I suppose if you put 800 columns, you wouldn't have enough room on the screen, but you could actually make it 4 if you really wanted to. After a while, you have to take a look at the web page, and you have to say, okay, how easy is it going to be for someone to view this? When we get into chapters 8, 9, and 10, that'll be really take on even more importance, because we'll start to say, well, what if we wanted to look at this on a phone? All right, and if we did, what would we want? In other words, it's up to us. We might want the header area to just disappear. We may or may not. We may want the header area to disappear and just show this, the main content area, and then underneath that, it would show the left aside, and underneath that, it would show the right aside, or vice versa. That's totally up to us through the use of what are called media queries that we'll get into later as far as how that's done. All right? So hopefully I'm going about this in the right way. Now, a couple people have emailed me, talked to me, or whatever, and said, you know, when I talked about doing this today, and people have given me different suggestions. People have suggested, well, could we work together, for example? What I am going to do when we get done today is I'm going to give you a different lab for chapter 6. If you decide you want to do that with other people, I really and truly don't have a problem with that. All right? And if you're going to do that with other people, you can either do it with other people, and yeah, Adam does have different packages that you can add that allow you to work on multiple machines, or one person can do it. All right, that's fine. All I'm going to ask is if you have 2 or 3, and I don't want more than 3 people in a group. It just gets too unwieldy when you have more than 3 people. All right, so you say, well, let's do the math. I guess if you really all wanted to break into groups and we did 3, 3, 3, 4, that would be okay. All right, it's tough when you have 2 people, just because of the fact if you have 2 people and one doesn't show, you don't have a group anymore. All right, but I've also found, like I said, with much more than 3, it's not a very big classroom, that it gets hard. The other thing too is the more people you have, what just tends to happen is the more people you have, the more possibly at least one person takes over. And when they take over, the other people just sit there and watch. All right? And I'm not saying you don't get anything out of doing that, but in some ways at least, when you do things like that, it's the old saying, the rich get richer. In other words, the person who takes the lead is showing their expertise and maybe even getting stronger. The other people may be learning, or they may just be listening and say, whatever. All right? But it just depends, because I've seen all different variations of this. All right? So the first thing that I'm going to do is, if you look here, I've got some folders. Or I had them. I don't know what happened to them now. There it is. So I've got a folder that says Chapter 4 on it. This is the one I just showed you. So that's the one that looks like this. So that's what I'm going to start with. All right? So in other words, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to grab this Chapter 4 folder. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to paste. And I'm going to call this folder Chapter 05. All right? I'm nothing big there. Now it looks exactly like 4. All right? But it's Chapter 5. And what I'm going to have to work on in here, I know, is in my styles folder, I'm going to have to work on the main. All right, there that is. And I may or may not have to work on the index file. All right, so I'm going to bring those two particular files up. And before I go on, because I don't have that open either, thought I did, but let's do this. I want to bring up the ShapeUp PDF file. Again, we have now gone through the work for Chapter 3 and the work for Chapter 4. So this is what we're doing for Chapter 5. I already showed you what, hopefully at least when we get finished, the completed project will look like. So it says, in this exercise, you'll use the CSS box model to add spacing, borders, and backgrounds to the ShapeUp homepage that you formatted in Exercise 4. When you're through, the page should look similar to this. I think I mentioned this to you before, but on the off chance I did not, I called my counterpart in St. Louis yesterday, Evan, and I told him, I said, you know, Evan, I love Muroc books. You may hate them, but I'm just telling you, I love Muroc books. But one thing I'm getting to, at least I believe as time goes on, is they don't have the best exercises in the world. These exercises that are in here, it's not that there's anything wrong with them, except for the fact that at times they're not specific as far as what they're looking for. So I told him I have decided that I'm going to go back. He has written exercises, labs for most chapters, along with homework for most chapters. So I'm going to go back, and starting in Chapter 6 here, I'm going to go and give you his stuff for labs, and we're going to work on this as a class. Now, we'll do this today for Chapters 5 and 6. If you really think, so if a majority of you would email me at the end of class and say, this isn't helping at all you're doing is wasting our time, then I won't do it. All right, but the idea is going over it, you won't find that it's a waste of your time and that you'll get something out of it. All right? So the good news, if you'd call it that, is when you look here, we don't really have a lot of specifications. All right? So what does it say here? It says we want to format the body so it's 900 pixels wide, has a steel blue border with a black shadow, and is centered in the browser window. Now that looks to me like that's all stuff that we're going to be able to put in the body of our CSS. Okay? So that's first thing. Second, add a steel blue border below the header and a steel blue background to the footer. And change the color of the footer text to white. Again, sounds to me like stuff we're going to put into our CSS. Third, add a gradient to the header. The gradient should range from white to the top to a light steel blue at the bottom. Again, sounds like CSS. Finally, adjust the margins and paddings for the elements on the page so that it looks as shown above. And that's, in a way at least, that's where this starts to break down, because you can do this stuff in here so many ways. All right? I did it myself in a certain way. Then I did. I'm not going to lie to you. I went in and I looked at the key, and I didn't do it the same way they did it. All right? So some of the stuff I kept, and some of the stuff I adjusted to use more of their stuff. All right? So what I'm going to do to start doing this, all right? So the first thing that I want to do, and again, this may be a little overkill in what I'm showing you, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all this stuff. All right, I'm going to grab all that, and I'm going to go into my CSS for Chapter 5. Again, that's what I just copied this to. So I'm going to come in there to the styles, into my main, and I'm going to edit that file. All right. Then just so I don't forget anything, I'm going to drop all of that stuff right in here. All right. And as I finish these things, I'll just basically, for lack of better words, kind of click them off as far as what I've done. So the first thing is I want to format the body, and I want to format the body so that it's 900 pixels wide, all right, so that it has a black shadow and it's centered in the browser window. All right, so far in the body, this is all we have, are the fonts that we're using. So taking these pretty much in turn, the first thing we're told is that the width should be 900 pixels. Now, one thing about this, and hopefully you all get this, that's not a real good thing, because that's an absolute value. All right? We would have been better off taking that 900, dividing it by 16, which would give us like 56.6 or something like that, and use M's, because they scale better for different kinds of media. But we're going to just follow the instructions of the author here. So we formatted the body so that it's 900 pixels wide. All right? Let's see what, if anything, that changed. All right? So this was our Chapter 4. We already saw that. This is our Chapter 5, the way we want it to look. But we haven't made many changes yet. So let's go back. This is our Chapter 5 index, I think. So let's do a run and bring it up in Chrome. Now, it doesn't look any different yet. Now, one reason it doesn't look any different yet is we didn't tell it to center on the screen. All right? Just so you know that. We did not tell it to center on the screen. But you may or may not have noticed, if you look over on the screen here, notice how there's nothing over here? Because probably our window is about 1210 pixels wide. We're not using those last 300 or so pixels now. That's what we just did by adding that width of 900 pixels. Does that make sense? All right. So we are starting to put some constraints in here. All right. So that was the first thing I wanted to do. Now, I'm looking here, and I should change this from Chapter 4 ShapeUp to Chapter 5 ShapeUp. That's the first thing. All right. Now, so we formatted it. Now we want a steel blue border with a black shadow, and we want that to be centered in the browser window. All right? So we want a steel blue border with a black shadow. Well, let's do the border first. Steel blue border, all right? We want it to have a black shadow. So let's put in the border, then we'll add the shadow. Now remember, because some of you, and it doesn't really matter. Some of you, when you've come up and you've asked me questions, you've taken this border that I'm going to put in as 3 pixels, solid, steel, blue. And you put that in as 3 different lines. So you've said border dash width 3 pixels. Then on the next line, border dash style, solid. Then on the next line, border dash color, steel blue, which is fine. All right, it's okay to do that. All right, I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to go back to where I just was, right here, and I'm going to refresh it. All right, is that pretty obvious what just happened? Okay. Sometimes the way that you learn the best, and I'm not saying you learn the best, the way that many people learn the best is not to put in 4 or 5 lines, put in a line and then run it again so you can see exactly what's changed. All right. Now, one thing, if you look on here, this is not centered. So even before I go in and put in that shadow, the order in which you put these lines doesn't matter, but I'm going to say here margin 0 auto. And you know what that does. We've already looked at this. So with a margin 0 auto, and again, I could have put it after the borderline, it doesn't matter. But as soon as I do that and I refresh, now again, hopefully, it's making more sense as far as what's going on in here. All right? It's still only using 900 pixels, but we told it to center on the screen. All right? We've told that we want 0 margin top and bottom and to auto center it left and right. All right? All right. So we did the formatting. We did the steel blue border, but we want a black shadow. Okay? And again, I think at least the best way to learn how to do this stuff is I would just keep going out to W3 schools and taking a look in there, basically, you know, put in box shadow or whatever, which is what this is. 0, 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 10 pixels. And that's it. Now, hopefully you all are to the point where when we say this, you understand. That's nothing on the top, 10 on the right, 20 on the bottom, 10 on the left. A couple people had asked me, do you need to put anything after the 0? You can, but it's 0. So if you want to put in 0px, you can, but it's redundant. So most of the time what you'll see is people will just put a 0 in there. All right? So again, I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to my page, and I'm going to refresh. Now, again, I'm asking, does that make sense? Can you see what we've done here? All right, make it nice and small. So there you go. So there's the 10, there's the 10, there's the 20, there's nothing. It's centered on the page, etc. Any questions on any of that stuff? All right, then we'll tell you what, we'll take a look at it during the break. All right. Any other questions? All right, so as far as I can tell, I've done all this. All right. All right, so second, we want to add a steel blue border below the header. All right, we want to add a steel blue border below the header. And a steel blue background to the footer, and change the color of the footer text to white. Well, the first thing is add a steel blue border below the header. So we take a look in here. There's our header. All right, so that's what it says. All right, and again, I'm not going to lie to you. I've done this before, but I'm relying on my notes. Why? Because I want to show you how to do it the right way. All right. Now, I do want to mention something to you. This is off topic a little bit, but I want to say this to you. All right. Evan and I like Evan. He's just a super person, and I think he's a very talented instructor. But we're having a little bit of a debate right now, because I'm just going to pretend for a second that, and don't put this in, please, that the width of this was 200 pixels, and that the height of this was also 200 pixels. Again, I'm going to remove this in a second. Evan believes that when you put in stuff like this, that these attributes Remember, these are the only two required attributes, source and alt. These are extra attributes that you can add to make life easier for the browser. All right? And Evan believes that those should be put right there. I disagree. I think they should go in the CSS. I was always taught of what's referred to as separation of concerns. So you take as much of the stuff that's going to affect the presentation and you put it in the CSS file. Just the content itself should go in the HTML file. All right? And the JavaScript that we'll get into later will basically be used for more interactivity. So the only reason I'm telling you that is I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm not saying that he's right. Because with a lot, you'll see it both ways. But if you're asked to do something on a test, I'm going to at least try to set it up so that you're always doing it in a standard way. I believe that I think it's even more counterintuitive and counterproductive. Oh, sometimes we'll put it in the HTML, sometimes we'll put it in the CSS. I think that's a bad way to code. All right, and again, you may agree with that, you may not agree with that. All right. So in here we've got an H1, we've got an H2, and we've got an H3. Okay? And let's see in our CSS. Okay, I've got all that stuff. I've got all that stuff. We're eventually going to come in here and we're going to end up putting in some margin and some padding in here. All right? But I've got all this body stuff, and one thing I don't have, would everybody agree? This is going to apply to any image that's in my header. Does that make sense? This is going to apply to any H2 element that's in my header and any H3 element that's in my header. Would everyone agree with that? But I don't have anything right now that I can see that is being applied just to the header itself. So I'm going to put that in. All right, why? Because that's where our gradient is going to go. We may want to put some more margin or padding in there. All right, but the next thing we were told to do was to add a steel blue border below the header, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in. I'm going to say border bottom 2 pixel solid steel blue. All right? Because again, that's what our requirements dictated that we do. All right? So again, when I come back here and I look, there's my header. Okay? So that's what I put in. Does that make sense? It's going to look different based on the number that you put in there. I put 2 pixels. If I put 10, it'd be a lot thicker. All right? But that's all that we've done with that. All right? So let's just go on. All right. We want to next add a steel blue background to the footer. Steel blue background to the footer. And we want to change the color of the footer text to white. All right. So we're going to go down to the footer here. Okay. Which now has text align center, font size 85. We want a background of steel blue. All right. And we want a color of white. Hopefully, at least, you find that pretty straightforward and you agree with what I just did. All right? I'll come right back to it, but let's look. So there is our header right now, and that's how we change it. You see the steel blue background, you see the white text. All right? So again, that was the CSS to do that. Any questions on any of that? All right. I know with some of you, you've done this. And you're like, no, just get going, all right? I just want to see the 3 column stuff. All right, we'll get there. But like I said, I wanted to do it this way because when you are doing your next test, which will be next week sometime, but when you're doing your next test, you will be asked to do things like this. All right? All right. So, coming back up to the top, we added the steel blue border to the header, or below the header. We added the steel blue background to the footer, and we changed the color of the footer text to white. All right? So we got two more things to do. Next thing to do, add a gradient to the header. The gradient should range from white at the top to light steel blue at the bottom. Again, when I was talking to you about headers, about gradients, I mentioned I kind of likened them to morphing. So this is going to morph from a white to a light steel blue. Now, one thing that we will get into later, in the last half of the class, when we start talking about JavaScript, because there's different ways that you can achieve effects. All right? So again, when I come back here, remember, this is what we want. Everybody see this? That's what we want, is that gradient. That's an effect. There's other ways that you can get effects. For instance, you can animate, where you move stuff across the screen. All right, you can also animate where you move stuff up and down, or you have something come into view very slowly. We're going to get into all that. But for right now, this is the way that we're doing the animation. All right, so what we want to do is we want to work with background images and gradients. All right, now this might be overkill, and I guess I could go out to, can I use .com, and I could come in here and probably type in gradient and see if they have something in there for background image gradient, or maybe even put that in, background image gradient. I don't know if it'll find, 0 results. Sometimes you have to be really weird the way you have to specify things in here. Try that. Doesn't like that either. All right, there's background image. And as far as I can tell, it is pretty darn well supported. All right, so I'm going to put it in the way that I put it in, but then I'm going to show you a couple things that I added, and I'll explain to you why I did those. All right, so you'll have to just bear with me for a second here. Okay, so to actually put that in here, to add the gradient, that one right there, okay, to the header, I'm going to go back down to the header. And again, maybe I'm just a little anal, but that's going on the bottom of the header. Right there, border bottom. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to put it above that. Doesn't matter the order in which you put these. That's just me. All right? And I'm going to say background, image, linear, and I got to spell image right. And let me make this a little smaller. Try to. All right, linear gradient. And I realize that might be a little bit hard to read, so let me break it up into more than one line. All right. So I'm telling it I want a linear gradient that goes from top to bottom, and I want it to start out with white, and I want it to end with light steel blue. Does that make sense? All right. And I'll come right back to it, but let me save this. Okay, and let me go back to my page again. And you saw right now there's no color in here. And boom, there's color in there. All right. Now, that's just fine. And by and large, just so you know, by and large, this will work on any browser. All right. But what I'm going to do, and I can't remember the exact term for it now, but I'm going to add some different add-ins for different browsers. All right? So I'm going to actually add 3 more lines in here. And I'm counting this as being one line. All right? So I'm putting it in there 3 times. You might, what are you doing that for? I'm going to do this. I'm going to type in here minus WebKit minus. Then down here, I'm going to type minus Moz minus. And on here, I'm going to type in minus O minus. And I'm not even going to ask, hey, you know what that stands for? Because I'm going to tell you. WebKit is the internal browser engine that's used for both Chrome and Safari. So that's a fix in case there's any problem with a person using Chrome or Safari. All right. The next one, Moz, is short for Mozilla. That's Firefox. The next one, minus O, that's Opera, which is another browser. We don't have to put anything special in here for IE. Okay? But again, those are add-ins, add-ons, whatever you want to call them. This should handle everything. Should. But just to be sure. Tell you my joke, I think it's funny because I have a weird sense of humor. I went out with a woman several years ago, and her best friend got pregnant. And they went to the doctor, ultrasound, it's going to be a girl. Made the room pink, did everything you're supposed to do, and had the name picked out, and people said, well, what if it's a boy? And they're like, it's not going to be a boy. Well, just in case, what are you going to name it? Of course, it was a boy, and they named him just in case. All right? Which is why we're doing this just in case. It should never be in a situation where we're even going to need these, but just in case. All right? Do you all understand the gradient, what we're doing here with this? Questions on that? Yes. Yeah, the question was, did you put this and this? There are a lot of different ways that you can create a gradient. All right? That's all I'll tell you. You know? Yeah, and there are. Again, if you go out to W3 schools or you just put in, CSS gradients in your browser, search bar, you're going to find so many different hits. All right? And I would never take off for something like that one way or the other. Because again, as I told you earlier, I want you to be developing your own style. To me, and again, maybe I'm a little anal again about this, to me, that's one of the most important parts of this class. Is that not only you learn how to do things, but you start to develop a style. All right? Believe me, there's a chance you could go to work. You could go to work for a company where they don't let you, they give you no chance to be creative. We do it like this. Luke, you don't like it? You can leave or you can do it like this. Because I've worked for companies like that. I was a professional programmer, and it was like I did certain things, and I got called out of the company. That's not the way we program here. My logic was fine. They didn't like the way I spaced things. They didn't like where I put curly braces. And it was like, we're not asking, we're telling you. Change it, do it the way we're doing it, or get the hell out. All right? Now, you may or may not have heard this, and maybe I told you this before, I don't remember, but approximately 40%, this is the estimate right now, within 5 years, 40 to almost 50% of all web developers will be people who are working as freelancers. They'll be working on their own. They won't be working for companies. So in that case, then you will have a style. All right? And you'll be able to use that style. All right? If Devin gets hired by a company that wants him to create a website from scratch, he can do it any way he wants. All right? And that's what you're developing in here right now. So the last thing that we have to do in here is to adjust the margins and the paddings for the elements so they look as shown above. And I'm going to show you this. I'm going to put it in here fairly quickly. All right? But I will put the stuff in. And again, a lot of it was just eyeballing. So you may not agree with what I've done. You may have done it differently. You may have different numbers in there, etc. That's not that big a thing. It is important that you start putting some stuff in there, so you start to format it on the page so that you get used to using margins and padding. All right, we've talked about the differences between them. I showed you an example of the differences between margin and padding. You know you've already used margins in this exercise. Remember we did margin 0 auto? All right, so we've already done that. Okay. So like I said, I'm just going to come in here and throw some stuff in here. The image was fine. DH2. Again, this is just stuff I've done. I added a margin bottom here. 0.3 M's. Oops. And what's 0.3? Well, 1 M is 16. So 0.3 is about 5 pixels. All right. And again, that was just by eyeballing it. All right. And now that I look at it, I also added something to the header because I'm trying to make sure that you see everything in here. So for the header, I put in padding of 15 pixels and 30 pixels. And again, you know what that means. 15 pixels and 30 pixels means 15 top and bottom, 30 right and left. Again, I could have come in here and used M's as well. All right. The other thing I wanted to make sure of, and I did not show you this, so I'm going to show it to you right now, was for all my H1 tags, all my H2 tags, all my H3 tags, and for my paragraph tag, I wanted all of them to start with no margin and no padding. Remember, in essence, what I've done there is I did a reset just for those. We talked about resets, all right, in one of the last 2 chapters that we've gone over. All right. So, I've got all that stuff. Another thing that we were asked to do, I believe, I don't remember if we did or I just thought it looked better, I don't remember, was I said for my anchor tags, all right, I wanted them to be bolded. I don't remember if we were asked to do that or not. I really don't remember. I just like the way it looked better. So I've added H1, H2, H3. That's all of them. That's not, I don't have header H1, header. That means every H1, every H2, every H3, and every paragraph on the page should start with 0 margin and 0 padding. And every anchor link on the page should be bolded. All right. Then we came in here and in our header, we added some top, bottom, and right, left padding. Okay. The image, I'm going to leave it as it is. The header 2, again, I added 0.3 M's. The header 3, I added some padding at the bottom. 0.75 M. You'll notice the stuff that I'm adding, I'm trying at least, when I can, to put in M's. And again, you might say, all right, why did you use margin there? Why did you use padding there? It's all a look and feel type of thing. I'm not saying you couldn't have made the same look doing it either way. All right? So that's the header H3. Then we move on to the section. And again, you'll notice one thing I don't have here is there's no regular just thing for the section. So I added one. All right, and I said for my section, I wanted there to be padding. I wanted 25 pixels on the top, 30 pixels on the right, nothing on the bottom, and 30 pixels on the left. And again, as we go through this stuff, if you disagree with what I've done, in other words, when you see the completed product in just a second, and you're like, you did too much, or then change yours. All right? I'm using my creativity, whether it's right or wrong. All right. So I put all that in. Let's save. My H1. Put anything in there? I'm looking real quick. We had the font size. Yeah, I put a margin bottom in there of 0.3 ems. In my H2, I also put a margin bottom in there, made it a little bigger. So instead of 0.2 ems, instead of 0.3 ems, I made it 0.5 ems. All right. So I've added this for my section, this for my section H1 rather, this for my section H2. Then for the H3, I again put in a little padding, but it's 0.4. So 0.3, it wasn't padding, I'm sorry, it's margin. I put in for the H1 section 0.3 ems, a margin bottom for the H2 0.5 ems, and for H3 0.4 ems. And again, how did I get that? It's just eyeballing. This is the kind of thing that as a web developer, you would be working with the person or persons you're creating the site for. Is this what you're looking for? All right. You could always go back then and change it. All right. For the paragraphs, I put in 0.7 ems of margin bottom. For the links, the color here was maroon. The color here was steel blue. I didn't touch those. All right. Which moved me down to what? To the aside section. And again, please look on the screen. There is nothing here just for the aside itself. So again, I added it. And I put in 5 pixels. And it's padding. I put in 5 pixels at the top, 30 pixels on the right, 25 pixels on the bottom, and 30 pixels on the left. Again, I can't say this to you too many times. If you don't think the way I did it looks the way that it does in the book, then change it to the way you think it should look. When I'm grading these things, I don't have time to say, gee, I put their padding 5 pixels, 30 pixels, 25 pixels, 30 pixels. Justin put 15 in there. I better take off. No, I'm not going to do that. Now, if you got stuff thrown all over the page and it doesn't look the way it's supposed to look, then I would take off. Right? All right. So the aside H2, I gave it a margin bottom of 0.5 ems. The aside UL, I didn't want there to be any margin in there. So I took away any margin that might exist. So I added this for the aside H2, and I added this for the aside UL. All right? The link and the visited, I guess they already were font weight bold, but that's okay. They have a color of steel blue. These have a color of maroon. Okay? The last thing that I put in there that I think we didn't have was, you know what? When I look at this, I actually didn't do this right. Remember we added this, correct? You all agree? We added that? Right? That background really shouldn't be being applied to the paragraph, because what if we ended up putting other things in that footer? Really, it would have been better to do it like that. And it may sound really simple. I also put in some padding here, so I'll put that in too. But I want everybody to understand, if you look on the screen, originally we had this line right there. And we took that background line and we put it in the paragraph. If we decide we're going to have another paragraph, not another paragraph. Let's just say we wanted to put a hyperlink. All right, after that paragraph, we wanted to put a hyperlink in our footer area. That paragraph or that footer link wouldn't be steel blue, wouldn't have a background of steel blue. This is saying the entire footer should have a background of steel blue. The entire footer should have padding of 15 pixels, top bottom, 30 pixels, right left. This says just paragraph text in the footer should be centered 85% in white. Do you understand the distinction? All right. Because I'm looking at it, would I have taken off for that? I don't know. I probably wouldn't have noticed, but it was wrong on mine. So I put in all that stuff. Time to save. Go back. This is what we currently have. I'm going to refresh. All right, and there it is. Okay. Again, does it look exactly like it does in the book? Probably not. All right. But it's a pretty reasonable facsimile of how it looks there. All right. And going back here, I have, as far as I know now, I can now come in here and remove this because I've done everything. All right. Does anyone have any questions on the CSS or the HTML that's in here for Chapter 5? Sir.
My additional resources section was kind of bunched together. Can you just go back to that?
Sure. Now, did you put a line height in? And again, it's another example. There are other ways we could have done that. Rather than line height, we could have decided to put some margin between each one of these. So there's always a multiple different number of ways that you can achieve the same kinds of effects. All right. Anyone else? Any questions? Is this helping? Does it make sense to do this? All right. Because after, we're going to take a break in just a minute, and after we do, the next job will be to do the one for Chapter 6. So we'll first do the 2 column, then the 3 column. Yes?
Can I get a copy of the CSS for Chapter 5 one?
The one we just did?
Yeah, I was working along with it, but my padding is all messed up.
All right, I will do it for that reason, but I don't like making a lot of copies of this stuff. Okay? All right. So it is 8:56. You got 12 minutes, so please come back at 9:08. There we go.
Martin back to the
Doesn't look like there should be anything wrong with that. Oops, wrong card. Where is your
Chrome? It's
No, not Chrome, but we're actually,
oh, the middle one right there.
you're right, it's definitely not moving over. Let's go back here. I don't see anything at all in there that should be making it not work.
Right.
That's all correct as far as the syntax. Well, that sure shouldn't matter. We just got some empty comment lines down there, but that should not matter at all. I don't see anything that's in your HTML that you've changed. Huh. I don't see anything that's wrong with it. Now, one more thing we can try here, that is, let's make this smaller. Oh. Whatever. Get rid of that. The only other thing I can think of is, now again, I want to make sure we are working with the same file. You know what I'm saying? And that's the only other thing that I can think of, is that somehow it's messed up. So where is this literally located? Is it here?
It should be right there actually. But yeah, it's in college. This semester too. I have all the ones from last year.
Gotcha.
Very top one. That's good.
You have, just use that one, that's fine.
Oh,
Right.
you're double clicking.
All right, there it is. main has gotta come after normalized. Normalized is turning
Oh,
everything off.
yeah.
Try changing those two and see if that fixes it.
Thank you.
No, but, well, let's see if, as we go through this, if that answers your question. Yeah. No, and I'm not saying that wouldn't happen, but there is no viable reason that that should happen. Okay.